Welcome to the night walks. I've been trying to get more walking in, and I've been using a fun little app called Step Bet. Step Bet, ooh, wow, that's bright. Is an app where you put up money, and you have a goal of being able to get so many steps in a day and in a week. And hi there. And if you don't hit your goal, then you forfeit money. And if you do hit your goal, whoever doesn't meet their goals, the money gets split between all those who do. It's kind of fun. I don't really think it's a bet so much as a increase in motivation, but I enjoy night walks, and I enjoy talking science. So here you go. Phylogeny, Ontogeny, and Research is the title of this fun little one. This little night rant. Feel free to ask questions, make comments. This is kind of fun. So just so y'all, those of you who aren't familiar with it, phylogeny refers to nature. Ontogeny refers to nurture. Basically, nature is like our genetic expression, phylogenesis, or phylogenetics. And ontogeny is kind of your learning history, those sorts of things. And I really enjoy these concepts and thinking about them. And more specifically, I'm really intrigued by research that's conducted in relation to phylogeny and ontogeny. And there's some pretty cool research that's done out there. And not just in behavior analysis or experimental analysis. There's a lot of cool research that's being conducted in many approaches or scientific views of the world. We ask all sorts of questions, and there's all sorts of ways that we can look at things, and there's a lot of theories out there. So when we talk about phylogeny, we're talking about, like, what is the nature of this particular organism? So I'll use as an example cats. Cats have vocal cords that are capable of making almost every single sound that a human can make. And yet within their nature, they don't express language like verbal vocal language like we do. So that's a phylogenic expression. Dogs are another really a good example. So dogs, because of their phylogenesis and their coevolution with humans, it turns out that they literally are humankind's best friend, because they are as far as I know, I could be wrong, they're the only other animal where when we make eye contact with them and they make eye contact with us, oxytocin, which is the relationship chemical, is released. When humans make eye contacts with our babies and vice versa, same thing happens, oxytocin release. So coevolution there, that's part of phylogeny, that's part of nature, the nature of the organism. And then of course ontogeny is looking at the way that nurture or the environment impacts our behavior and how that interacts with our phylogenesis, our nature. So I absolutely adore exploring research, not just from the behavior analytic perspective, but from other perspectives on how our nature is impacts our behavior. And there's a couple little theories I want to talk about tonight, because I think these are just so cool. The first one is game theory. I believe it's evolutionary psychology. It could be social psychology too. There's actually, I think, a few fields that utilize game theory and do game theory research. But the premise of it is very simple. And the early research was with machines, with people in different rooms. But the concept is, if I and another person are in different rooms And if I put a token into the machine and the other person put a token into the machine, we both get 2 tokens back. But if neither of us puts a token in, nothing comes out, so we can keep the coin. And then if only one of us puts a token in, the other person who doesn't get a token in gets 3 coins back. And there's been some pretty solid research conducted on game theory. And it basically has to do with trust. And how does trust evolve? How does trust create it? And it's really fun to look into the research that's been conducted on this. One of the interesting studies, well, many of the interesting studies have demonstrated a consistent pattern. So the pattern is that there's people who are always honest, there are people who always cheat, and there are people who are the copycats. So if if you're honest, I'll match you. If you cheat, I cheat. Next time. And then there's people who kind of try to figure it out. They're the game players. So they figure out what type of person this other person is, and based off of how they behave, they'll mimic them. So basically what happens is if they find out somebody is always playing fair, then they get to the point where it's like, oh, well, they're always going to play fair regardless, so I'm just going to always cheat. And we're not sure how much of this is nature nurture, right? For the different groups, but there appears to be certain concentrations of people who take this particular approach. And it's really fascinating because when you look at game theory and you look at trust and how trust is evolved and created, you can see how relationships connect and come together and result in some pretty interesting outcomes, which is one of the reasons why I think it's good to look at game theory and consider that in relation to how humans behave. For those who are just joining, I'm on a night walk, so if the lights get kind of weird and all that, that's because I'm out walking and enjoying myself and then rambling. So yeah. So game theory is pretty cool as a way of looking at things, and game theory also is really intriguing as a potential application towards relationships, especially in how behavior analysis as a field in science is applied. This can be applied pretty much everywhere that behavior analysis applies, from learning disabilities and developmental delay services to environment and basically any place where humans are interacting with each other. Also, organizational behavior management is another good application for this. And it's revealing some interesting things about the nature of people. And it leads to some curiosity and some questions. And I want to dive more into this because it just piques my curiosity and intrigues me even further. But that's game theory. Game theory is a fascinating series of research that is outside of the behavior analytic perspective, and yet there's so much that we could benefit from and utilizing and applying the existing research towards what we do. Now, second theory that I wanted to mention, this is a social psychology theory. It's from the principal researcher behind this is Dr. Jonathan Haidt. He was actually one of the first TED Talks to ever be done. And in his TED Talk, he actually proposes 5, but later on he published a book called The Righteous Mind, where he actually gives 6 moral foundations. Can't recall all of them off the top of my head, but these moral foundations are things like fairness versus cheating, care versus harm, loyalty versus betrayal, sanctity versus degradation. I think I got almost all of them. What was the last one? Anyways, these moral foundations, Dr. Haidt, spelt Hyatt, pronounced Haidt, and his research team have been doing some really amazing research, cross cultures, and trying to make sure it's not just the weird culture. I forget what the weird stands for, but basically I think it's like white Western or basically a lot of psychological research is typically very very centric to the Western world, whereas the moral foundations theory research appears to be pretty well distributed across more than just the Western world, at least so far. And hopefully some good things are going to be continuing to come from this. But moral foundations theory, another way of looking at morality is also considered as ethics, because as it turns out, the study of morality and ethics, in that field, those terms are interchangeable. So you can refer to a moral and an ethics interchangeably within the field of study of that. I've looked at some other definitions, and so far the only definition that might put a delineation between morals and ethics is that morals tend to not be codified and ethics are codified, but that's not necessarily true, and I feel like that's not a very solid definition. So the terms are interchangeable. So when you look at moral foundations theory and you look at, these are 6 core moral foundations or ethical foundations that are present in concentrations across populations, across cultures, then what that starts telling me is if the research is showing that this is consistent across populations, then this might be a phylogenic expression of human behavior, meaning that if these are core moral foundations that are present, then this means that there's a commonality between groups of people, and it's incredibly fascinating. So Dr. Haight's research he first put forth completely in the book The Righteous Mind, which is fantastic. And then if you want to dive a little bit deeper into his research, The Happiness Hypothesis is another pretty cool book that I've slowly been going through and enjoying, because he asks some really solid questions. He and his folks, I should say, that he works with, are asking really good questions, and I really like asking those questions and considering the things. But how does moral foundations apply to behavior analysis? Well, if you look at relational frame theory and an application of relational frame theory, an application of relational frame theory is acceptance and commitment therapy and or training, right? And in ACT, there is this concept of values. Well, if you look at values as just another expression of moral foundations or culture or phylogenic expression of human characteristics, then those moral foundations are actually potentially 6 universal values, and it creates some pretty cool questions and opportunities and ways of looking at things in a new light. I absolutely adore exploration and looking at these things and being curious and trying to look at them through the behavior analytic lens, because if I can start looking at it this way and I can use information gained from other researchers in other fields, one, that builds something, that builds a relationship with other research, because people are all asking really good questions and we're exploring. This is what science is about. 2, this allows for us to have a better understanding of how things are working and what's going on. Because if it turns out that we have some universal values and we have some universal moral or ethical codes, then that allows for us to be able to find some common grounds and be able to create some solid definitions of terminology and being able to solve problems. So I mentioned at the start of this video, game theory, right? And now I'm mentioning moral foundations theory. Game theory is about trust, about building trust, and how do we create that trust. And moral foundations theory is about ethics and universal values. So then these are 2 ways that we can start looking at the world a little bit differently and create connections and create and build trust and shape culture, shape the way we do things differently. which isn't shaping culture, isn't that shaping environment, isn't that changing the way we do stuff? So this is all pretty cool. Now, also in application with moral foundations theory, I'm going to go into a third one. Another social psychology research. This social psychology research is from, Robert Bandura. There we go. Robert Bandura and research on moral disengagement theory. Now, interestingly, Robert Bandura has some grounding in behavior analysis training. And with Robert Bandura, he actually proposes that moral disengagement is... he puts it forth in antecedent behavior consequence, right? So ABCs, and he talks about the antecedents and the environment, and there might be some phylogenetic components there too, but we don't know. There needs more research needs to be done on it. The behavior is moral disengagement. Remember how I said earlier, moral and ethical can be interchangeable, so we could also call that ethical disengagement. So if we're looking at moral or ethical disengagement and we're looking at antecedent behavior consequence, and of course the consequence being, what are the functions? Attention, access, escape, avoidance, automatic, right? Then what we're starting to see is that research outside of behavior analysis is identifying possible indicators or precursors towards disengaging and creating ethical problems, ethical dilemmas, which means that, again, another research area outside of behavior analysis can be and should be, I think, applied to behavior analysis and organizational behavior and how we do things, because we're all about shaping the environment. And again, this is all bringing those connections together. So if you have moral disengagement and moral foundations collaborating with relational frame theory, which is a behavior analytic or functional contextualist approach, and then we're looking at game theory, and we're connecting all these ideas together, and we're seeing, oh wait, how do I change the environment? Okay, now we start looking at how do we change the environment for our learners? How do we change the environment for our staff? How do we change the environment for ourselves? How do we change the environment for parents? How do we change the environment for teachers and administrators? We're looking at all these fantastic ways that, and the research that's been conducted on it, which is, there's a ton. And then we can add our behavior analytic perspective. We can start creating operational definitions or refining the existing definitions that are provided. And it can result in some explosion of advancement in relation to how we perceive and engage with behavior. I really wish that this was something that was explored more often within our field, and I am working on some CEUs that talk about this sort of thing and connect it. I'm also working on a book that's interconnecting all these things in another area of study called memetics, with the relational frame theory. There's a lot of really cool things that we can do if, instead of being stuck inside of the narrow view of only behaviorism, if instead we expand our view and go, oh wait, behaviorism is about human behavior. Human behavior includes the way that others research and explore as well. Okay, so let's be curious. Let's explore and see what we can do and how we can apply this and how we can utilize this towards the betterment of the environment, how the betterment of our culture, the betterment of our microcultures, our individual cultures, our company cultures, the way we serve our learners. It changes everything, and it's so wonderful. So I hope that offered some points of curiosity and of exploration. If you want to dive in a little bit into these sorts of things, I mentioned Dr. Haight's research, and that's fantastic stuff. Dr. Bandura's work there's actually a textbook called Moral Disengagement. It's really, really solid. It's one of those things I'm gradually working my way through. If you want to look at some research that's been done by a collaboration of behaviorists and other folks look at prosocial with Dr. David Sloan Wilson and Dr. Hayes. That's a functional contextualist approach to things. And then if you just want to have a fun understanding and better exposure to how we can look at things from an environmental perspective, Dr. David Sloan Wilson's book, This View of Life, Completing the Darwinian Revolution, which actually addresses some misinformation about what evolution is, the theory, and its application, as well as proposing ways of looking at environment and how environment impacts behavior. That's really fantastic too. But there you go. Phylogeny, ontogeny, and research. Do y'all have any questions? Is there anything that you're curious about? Is there anything that you would like to learn more about? I love nerding out about this stuff, so please feel free to ask questions either during this live or more likely in the comments for the distributed recording. But like, what are some ways that we can utilize this in behavior analysis? And what are some ways that behavior analysis can also improve the way that other fields are applying their research? And with that, I'm going to bid you all a good night. Stay curious and have a great weekend that's coming up.